Hello students, in this chapter we are going to discuss the wildlife sanctuaries, national parks and bioreserves. So first of all, what you need to understand is what exactly these three terms mean and how are they different from one another. Apart from that, some of the important wildlife sanctuaries and national parks and bioreserves of India, you cannot know about all of them because the numbers are very high. Only in case of biosphere reserves, this is 18 in number in India, but the number of wildlife sanctuaries and number of national parks is very high. So that's why we cannot know about that. So the most important thing that we need to know is what is the definition of these terms and how exactly are they different from one another, and some of the important sites which are there in India with respect to these three different variations. So the first, if you talk about the wildlife sanctuaries, wildlife sanctuary basically is any area other than the area comprised within a reserve forest or the territorial waters can be notified by the state government to constitute as a sanctuary if such an area is of adequate ecological, flora, fauna, geomorphological or natural or zoological significance. So for the purpose of protecting, propagating and developing the wildlife and in its environment. So that's why some restricted human activities are only allowed in the sanctuaries, and this basically happens according to the Wildlife Protection Act of 1972, and specifically it is chapter number 4 there. So if we look at the important characteristics of a wildlife sanctuary, first of all, it is a natural area which is reserved by the government or private agency for the protection of particular species. Then apart from that, the area is designated for the protection of wild animals. Then only animals are conserved, could be private property also, outside activity is allowed. Then apart from that, it comes under the category called as protected areas. The protected areas are declared under Wildlife Protection Act of 1972. And then finally, one last point that you should know, that IUCN has defined this as category 4 type of protected areas. What are these protected areas? Towards the end of the chapter we'll come back to it. Then the next one that you have, then if you look at this map, these are some of the important sites of wildlife sanctuaries in India. Now in total there are actually 543 wildlife sanctuaries. So that's why you cannot know the names of all of them. This map just gives you an estimate of some of the most important wildlife sanctuaries in India. Then if you look at this table gives you the number of total number of wildlife sanctuaries that exist for each and every state. So the percentage of area of the state that is taken, the number of wildlife sanctuaries that are there, the total state area that wildlife sanctuaries cover, the area in kilometers square, all these things have been given in this list. So what you can take down from here is only the areas where the percentage coverage is the highest. You can say the top 3 and the lowest, the bottom 3. That's the most important part. Plus if you want, you can take it area wise. So if you look at this table, the total area that has been designated to a given state as a wildlife sanctuary has been given here, but this will be the factor that will be the most important. Then the next one that we have is a national park. So national park basically is a park in use for conservation purposes. So often it is reserved for natural or semi-natural or developed land that would be declared by a state. So although individual nations will designate their own national parks differently, there is a common idea. And this common idea is that the conservation of wild nature for prosperity as a symbol of national pride. But there is a common idea. And this is the conservation of wild nature of prosperity and as a symbol of national pride. So the IUCN, or you can say one of its bodies, that is World Commission on Protected Areas, has defined this as category 2 type of protected area. So it is also home to many species of birds, animals which are established by the center and the state governments for the conservation process. So if you look at the common most important characteristics of a national park, First, it's a reserve area of land owned by the government. Then second, you can say that the area is protected from human exploitation, industrialization and pollution. Third point is no cutting or grazing is allowed, but outside species are allowed. And then it comes under the category of protected areas. The protected areas are declared under Wildlife Protection Act of 1972. The conservation of wild nature of posterity as a symbol of national pride. This is the most important part. And then finally, the categorization which is done by IUCN as a part of protected areas, it is category 2 type of protected area. So if you look at the important national parks that we have in India, these are some of the ones, but again the numbers that we talk of are very, very high, and that's why there is no need to know each and every one of them. Only the ones that have been in news are the ones which you need to discuss. The next one that we have is a biosphere reserve. So biosphere reserves are sites which are developed by countries and are recognized under UNESCO's Man and Biosphere program to promote sustainable development based on local community efforts and sound science. So the program of Biosphere Reserve was initiated by UNESCO in 1971, and the purpose of this formation of Biosphere Reserve was to conserve in situ all forms of life along with its support system in its totality, so that it could serve as a referral system for monitoring and evaluation of changes in natural ecosystems. So the first biosphere reserve of the world was established in 1979, and since then a network of biosphere reserves have been increased to 631 in 119 countries across the world. So if you look at the characteristics of biosphere reserve, the very first thing is that these are notified areas which cover larger area of land, which may cover multiple national parks, sanctuaries and reserves as well. Second, the area is meant for conservation of biodiversity of a specific area. Then there are three main areas: core, buffer and marginal. Then the next, as we already discussed, that it is recognized within the framework of UNESCO's Man and Biosphere program and nominated by the national governments. And finally, the Ministry of Environment and Forest provides financial assistance to the respective state governments for conservation of landscape and biological diversity and cultural heritage. So if you look at this diagram, there are total of 18 biosphere reserves in India, and these are the 18 that exist. First is the cold desert, then you have Nanda Devi, then you have Kanchenjunga. So all these 18 are the ones which are categorized as biosphere reserves of India. So in total, if you look at these 18 I have listed out here, just go through the name and the region where they belong, because this is what you can expect a question from. So what happens is, when you talk about a biosphere reserve, it can be very large and it can contain national parks and wildlife sanctuaries inside it. So all these possibilities exist, but this will be a biosphere reserve will be a much larger area. So these are these 9 plus these 9. These are the total 18 biosphere reserves of India. So you can just pause it and you can just note down some of the key features. For example, area wise, the ones which have the largest area, at least the top 3 you can know, and apart from that, just go to the map and just look at the map and see which are the areas where these biosphere reserves of India are present. And then finally, we talked about the protected areas which are declared by IUCN. So these are the categories that we have. The most important one for us is category 2 and category 4, because category 2 is national park and this is related to the wildlife sanctuaries. So the categorization of protected areas that is done by IUCN, it's done according to these 7 brackets. 1A for strict nature reserve, 1B for wilderness area, 3 for natural monument or feature, 5 for protected landscape or seascape, and 6 for protected areas with sustainable use of natural resource. So this is a brief chapter, but we just needed to know what are the differences between the three types of categorization that we do for protected areas. So go through the categories, remember the categories, try to understand those categories, and then only go to the prelims examination. So this is where this chapter also ends. Thank you.